All right. Um, this was the last thing we talked about. We discussed what is the function of the small intestine and how is the small intestine adapted to perform that function. The function of the small intestine is to absorb, is absorption, although there is some chemical digestion, but it's absorption. How is it adapted to perform that function? It's got villi, which increase the surface area. And then at the top of those, you have microvilli that further increases the surface area. And then the third thing, this is just kind of a review from the last question. The third thing was circular folds, and that forces the chyme in a circular direction. That's kind of where we left off with that last question. These are the cells that, the intestine cells that absorb. And this is just telling you that how things get in. So whatever type of sugar you have, starch, maltose, whatever, it has to be broken down into glucose. And then once it's broken down into glucose, it's going to cross over by diffusion, and it's just going to enter the bloodstream. That's what this top one is showing you. So this is like carbs, proteins, lipids, because that's the three types of energy that we're eating in our food: carbs, proteins, and lipids. The middle one's proteins, and that's just telling you that essentially needs to be broken down into amino acids. You can have some very short protein chains, but it should be broken down into amino acids, and it's going to cross over by diffusion as well, meaning higher concentration to lower concentration. So as long as the concentration of amino acids is lower in the blood, they're going to cross over and enter the bloodstream. Fatty acids or lipids have to be broken down into fatty acid chains. And they're going to go into the lacteal, the lymphatic system, because your blood is water-based, hydrophilic, lipids are hydrophobic. They're not going to mix together. There is a part of a fatty acid chain, so like a triglyceride looks like the letter E, and there's the part of the letter E that goes like that, like the three horizontal parts, and then there's that one vertical part. That part of the letter E is actually a carbohydrate, or it's related to a carbohydrate. It's called glycerol. So when you take a triglyceride, the glycerol part of it, that can turn into like a carbohydrate. So that kind of gets handled a little bit differently. But what I really wanted to get to, which was the next question, actually, before we get to that, let's get to the large intestine. So now we're at the large intestine. Here's the end of the small intestine. We've absorbed everything we're going to absorb from it. Now, all of this chyme, liquid chyme, is going to go into the large intestine. The large intestine absorbs water. So that's the main job of it. We want to take back that water. So the large intestine is going to reabsorb about 80 to 90% of the fluid that was in the chyme. So it's going to turn the chyme into feces. So you notice a couple things. There's your appendix. That's just kind of filled with lymphatic tissue. This is called the cecum. That's more for lab. And then it's going to ascend, transverse, descend, and then right here where it kind of makes like a P-trap, like under your sink, that's called the sigmoid, sigmoid colon. So there's these like bands of muscle, like right here, kind of in the middle, and they're called Taenia coli. And they just kind of constrict to help the fluid or the chyme or the feces move through. And it actually, these Taenia coli make these little like bunches, like they bunch up the intestine into these things we call Hausdrug. Again, that's for lab though. So the main job of the large intestine, reclaim or reabsorb water, because that's leaving anyway. So the more time you spend in the large intestine, the more water is going to be taken out of this chyme, and then the less time that is spent in the intestine, the more it's diarrhea. So, and the problem with that, since you didn't reclaim the water, you're losing water there. So dehydration is like a major issue with that. So now I want to get into the last. So you need to know what the large intestine does, and I want to get into the last question here for the digestive system. I want you to discuss the phases of digestion. And I've got this written down into other slides right after this. But there's 3 phases of digestion. There's a cephalic phase, gastric, and intestinal. So cephalic, you should be thinking head, right? So cephalic phase is all in your head. It's your brain. It's smelling food, seeing food, thinking about food, and what happens when you smell food thinking. Stomach growls, your mouth waters. That's the cephalic phase. So we could argue that digestion happens even before food goes into your mouth. And then the gastric phase is once the food gets into your stomach. So when the food gets into your stomach, it's going to stretch it out, and it's going to change the pH of your stomach. Because when you put food in that acid, you're diluting the acid, right? You're buffering the acid. So the pH changes. That's going to send a signal up to the brain. Also, when there's food in there, it stretches out. So you've got stretch receptors, you've got chemoreceptors. They're sending signals up to the brain. And I've got that on a slide. Then the food goes into the intestine. Same thing. Same thing when you have food go into the small intestine. There's stretch receptors, there's chemoreceptors, and they're going to be communicating with the brain as well. So let me move to those slides. So first thing, you think about food. Second phase, food's in your stomach. Third phase, food's in your intestine. So that's the first phase. So the receptors are going to get like just the thought or just the sight. There's no receptors. The thought or the sight of food gets the hypothalamus. That's where like hunger and thirst, that's the center for that, right? So it's going to activate it. And then your brainstem is going to activate your cranial nerve 7 and cranial nerve 9. So cranial nerve 7 is the facial nerve. The facial nerve over here is going to activate submandibular, sublingual, your parotid, salivary glands, right? And then you have your glossopharyngeal, which is going down here, cranial nerve 9. It's going to activate these glands, right? And then the last nerve, the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10, that's the only one of those 12 cranial nerves that go down past the shoulders, right? So that one's going down to your stomach, and it's going to cause the cells in your gastric pits to secrete like mucus and to secrete gastric fluid. So you've got 3 different nerves that go down, 7, 9, and 10. Facial to the glands here, glossopharyngeal to the glands down here, because you've got your submandibular and your sublingual, both like under your tongue. And then in your stomach, the vagus nerve continues down to your stomach and activates those. So that's why your stomach's growling, you're secreting stuff, your mouth is watering. That's all cephalic phase. So that one, that part of it, does that make sense? Taking that as a yes. Now the food's got into your stomach. So you chewed up the food, swallowed it, went down into your stomach. You have chemoreceptors and stretch receptors. Stretch, because the stomach's going to stretch as you put food in it. Chemoreceptors, because the pH of the stomach is going to go up as you put food into it. So what happens, you're going to activate the enteric nervous system. So remember that there's nerves attached. It's like the myenteric plexus. There's nerves attached to the muscle in your GI tract. So in this case, you're activating the nerves that innervate the muscle in your stomach. So your stomach muscles are going to start contracting. Right, that's going to start peristalsis. Right, now you have then you have a hormone. So we've got 3 hormones that we're going to talk about: gastrin, and then the other 2, which are called secretin and CCK. That's on the next slide. So this slide is just one of the 3 hormones, gastrin. Gastrin encourages what we call gastric emptying. So gastrin is going to tell your pyloric sphincter to open up because you're trying to get food out of the stomach. Because your stretch receptors got triggered, meaning that there's food in there. What's the response to that? Open up the pyloric sphincter, get rid of the food, gastric emptying. Right, so you want to make more gastric juice. You want to relax the pyloric sphincter. You want to increase motility. That's getting rid of the food. As soon as your acidity, your pH goes to either 2 or below 2, somewhere around there, it'll stop all of this. Or when you're not stretching your stomach out anymore because there's no food in it, then you could stop this process. The gastric phase will stop. So that's the gastric phase. Last phase, intestinal phase. Now the food goes into the intestine. And the first part of the intestine is the duodenum. Right? So when that gets distended or stretch out, it's going to cause what we call the enterogastric reflex. So the stretch receptors are sending a message up to the medulla oblongata. And there is some pH as well, but really it's mostly stretch receptors. And what you're trying to do is the intestines are trying to stop gastric emptying. You're trying to inhibit parasympathetic stimulation. So if you remember, sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest or digest. So this is all digestive system. So this is all parasympathetic stimulation. So you want to try to stop that because you have enough food in your small intestine. The stomach just gave you a bunch of food. You want to take that food and start working with it and absorbing the stuff out of it. You don't want the stomach to keep giving you food because you're trying to work through the food that you have. So that's what it's trying to do. So the gastric phase is trying to open up the pyloric sphincter. The intestinal phase is trying to stop all of that happening. And then we have 2 more hormones. Cholecystokinin, which you could just put CCK. So cholecystocin is going to have two targets. It's going to go to the gallbladder and it's going to go to the pancreas. So it goes to the pancreas to cause the secretion of enzymes.
Get out of here.
So CCK is going to be released because of amino acids and fatty acids. So like proteins and fats are in the intestine. That's going to cause release of CCK. That means that CCK is going to go and cause the gallbladder to contract. So what's the gallbladder holding? Bile. So when the gallbladder contracts, you're pushing bile into the small intestine to deal with the fatty acids. You're also going to have pancreatic hormones. I just put pancreatic secretions here, but we're talking about hormones. Why secreting the hormones? To take care of the amino acids. So what's triggering the release of CCK? Amino acids and fatty acids. Those are going to make the pancreas release its enzymes and the gallbladder release bile. That's CCK. So that's one hormone that's secreted by the small intestine. The other one is going to be called secretin. Secretin is activated by the fact that the chyme is acidic. So that chyme coming from the stomach is acidic. That's a signal for the pancreas to release its bicarbonate. So when secretin goes to the pancreas is going to release bicarbonate. That bicarbonate is going to meet the acid and it's going to buffer the acid. So if you remember bicarbonate, it has a pH of around 8, somewhere around 8, 8.5, 8.8, whatever. So you want to inhibit gastric juice. Hold on. You want to inhibit gastric juice because that has the acid in it. You want the stomach to stop secreting acid into the small intestine. And you want the pancreas to secrete bicarbonate to meet that acid, to buffer it. So you got 3 stages to the cephalic phase. So let's write some questions on the board. Did I turn it off? I'll just leave it off. Hold on, let me turn it off. All right. So the first question that we just discussed. It's kind of a long one. Explain. The rest of them you already had. So this is like one of the only ones. This is, I think, the only question that I'm adding to what you already have. Explain the phases of digestion. Don't just put cephalic, gastric, intestinal. It's not enough. What happens in each of them? It's a long question. And They can read it. This one you had before. I'm just putting it up there again. What's the function of the small intestine? And how is it adapted to perform that function? Small intestine absorbs things. How is it adapted? Like, what are the features of the small intestine that allow it to absorb things? And number 3 was the exact same question. Same as number 2, but put the stomach in there. What is a function of the stomach? And how is it adapted to perform that function? Same question. Enzymes. Learn that enzyme list and learn the substrates and learn where they're made. So I could ask you to list the enzymes with a protein substrate. And then where are they made? So you'd have to, like, there's like pepsin that's made in your stomach, and then there's aminopeptidase and elastase and trypsin. Those all deal with proteins. So you've got 4, I forget how many I gave you. Trypsin, chymotrypsin, aminopeptidase, elastin. Those 4 are from your pancreas. And then pepsin. So there's 5 enzymes there. Pepsin from your stomach. That's for proteins. If I ask you carbohydrates, amylase from your pancreas, and then the 3 cross-border enzymes, the 3 enzymes that come from your small intestine. Sucrase, lactase, maltase. Can't think of my 5th question. Maybe I don't have one. Hold on, I gotta look at my slides and see if I get any inspiration. Oh. Last one. Swallowing. There was 2 stages of that. So explain the process of swallowing deglutition. So there was the pharyngeal stage and the esophageal stage. Actually, you have all 5 questions because I don't have any more. So you add these questions to what you have from last class. So you're going to add these, add the respiratory, add these. So that's about 10 questions. Add that to your list. Do you know I'm taking these? This is a new chapter, so these are guaranteed, right? And then what the other questions are going to be, I don't know. I'm going to take that list of questions and I'm going to start just deleting questions kind of at random. Like, I'm not even going to have my glasses on, so it just looks like a blur. I'm just going to start deleting questions until I get it down to like 10, and then I'm going to add these to it. So, any questions on anything? Any questions on from those from that study guide?
I have a question. I was having trouble finding the answer to one of the questions on the study guide.
Yeah.
Number 1, the first question.
Okay. I don't. Do you happen to have it close to you?
Yeah, hold on. It's right
I don't
here.
remember what it was.
What it is, it says besides vacuolar spasms, what are the other two ways blood loss
Yeah.
can be controlled? Explain their pathways as completely as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one's the one, the blood vessel. So I wanted you to talk about the platelet plug.
Yeah, and I seen we had a question like that on our test, but I didn't see the
Yeah,
rest of the
we just
question.
I asked it a little bit differently, but so
Okay.
discuss the platelet plug, and don't forget there's like 3 chemicals. There's like ADP and serotonin and thromboxane A2. And then discuss um, blood clotting. That'll be on the same quiz. So blood clotting is going to start with um, prothrombinase. So probably both questions are on that same test. So it'll say like prothrombinase is going to convert prothrombin into thrombin.
Okay.
Thrombin is going to convert fibrinogen into fibrin. I can write it out if you want. But if you have that test, I don't know, I forget if it was an exam or a quiz, but both questions are on there. I just turned both of those questions into one question.
Gotcha. Okay, I have the quiz with the palette and
Okay.
stuff like that. So
Anyone got anything else? Is your fire alarm on? Is your like battery low battery?
who me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long you had that on?
I don't really be hearing it, but everybody else be telling me that something wrong with my battery. I guess I didn't got used to it.
Yeah, I had a student that had that go for the whole entire semester. Like
Yeah, I'm
every
used to
week
it
I
now.
was like, hey, you gotta go put like a 9-volt battery in there. You want me to like come over and get like a chair from the dining room and just I was like messing with you. Anyone have any questions? Like any other questions that you're having trouble with?
Where would we find number 6 when it's talking about the stem cells becoming lymphocytes, myeloid or lymphoid?
That one's that is it. Am I asking about lymphoid cells?
It
I
says
mean,
and it says what stem cells become lymphocytes, myeloid or lymphoid?
lymphoid.
What will megakaryocytes become? Is that
Platelet.
okay?
So there's just 2 words you need to know: lymphoid stem cells. That's the first question, and then the second question is platelets. Megakaryocytes become platelets.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that in class, but that's an easy. Y'all seeing anything else? I'm going to stop recording.